August 1944, a sun low behind broken clouds over a captured Luftwaffe strip in northern Germany. In the wide hangar, under flaking paint and the smell of oil, an American F4U Corsair sat like an animal at rest, its inverted gull wings casting a predator silhouette, and its long, tapering nose ending in a propeller hub that looked almost too large for the fuselage. Bright exhaust stains traced the cowling, and a peculiar intake geometry hugged the lower fuselage, hints of an engine installation that did not match any manual the Germans had on hand. The question that filled the room was operational and immediate. What about this machine had allowed it to cross a line and land here? And could that capability be turned against Allied formations? The capture had been messy and fast. A party of infantry had secured the perimeter, while a single German pilot, whose boots still smelled of mud, walked the length of the Corsair, traced his gloved hand across the fabric-covered control surfaces, and then reported back that command wanted answers in 45 minutes. The man assigned was Oberleutnant Erich Stahl, 32. Seasoned within test circles, a former aerobatic flyer turned operational evaluator who had logged more than 24 types under wartime conditions, and who had been recommended by Hauptmann Weber for his steady hands and intolerance for rumor. He did not accept authority by rank alone. He wanted numbers, not stories. He wanted thrust curves and climb rates, aileron response at differing G-loads, and a verdict on whether this airframe altered the practical envelope of engagement. He had 45 minutes of daylight and a hangar full of people waiting for confirmation that would ripple beyond the airfield. The promise that followed was clinical. They would clock acceleration, record top speed over a measured course, time rate of climb to 5,000 feet, measure control forces at various angles of attack, and compare every figure to the Bf-109 and FW-190 fleets. If the Corsair gave the Allies a persistent energy advantage, the consequence would not be limited to tactics. It might force a rewrite of interception doctrine across a theater already running on thin margins. The theater team formed fast around him. Named personnel were present and moved with specific tasks. Hauptmann Karl Weber stood with arms folded and a clipboard, enforcing priority. Obermeister Hans Kraus, chief mechanic, crouched at the propeller flange with a wrench, smelling hot metal and used oil. Dr. Anneliese Richter, an aerodynamicist from the technical section, kept a small notebook, her eyes bright under goggles, fingers stained with grease. Lieutenant Johann Jorgensen from intelligence hovered near the instrument panel, trying to decode foreign inscriptions. Gefreiter August Müller manned the ground radio, his voice hoarse after nights on watch. Unteroffizier Dieter Schmidt marshaled a cart of spare instruments and chronometers. Feldwebel Erwin Lange, a logistics officer, organized transport and fuel priorities. Each had a role, and each moved in a choreography of folly. Urgency. The first exchanges were terse and factual and set the tempo. Oberleutnant Stahl said, "I need full tanks and 2 shallow runways." Hauptmann Weber answered, "Fuel is cleared, runway 2 is prepped, you have 20 minutes to get airborne." Obermeister Kraus added, "I will clear the magnetos and check oil pressure. Do not tax the engine on first spin." Dr. Richter said, "Note control harmony at 50 knots and again at 200. Lieutenant Jorgensen asked, "Do you want recorded radio chatter?" Stahl replied, "Yes, log everything and start timers on rotation." Gefreiter Müller signed, "Radio is hot. I will call broken readings." Unteroffizier Schmidt said, "I will ride the truck with spare plugs. Last thing we need is a mag issue." Feldwebel Lange closed, "We hold orders until your report reaches command." The sensory fabric of that morning was dense. The hangar smelled of hot oil and cold rain. The metal of the fuselage was warm under his palms. The steel tasted of ozone when he leaned under the cowling. The sound of the prop wash came as a small, urgent roar before full power, and the light fell in hard lines across the cockpit rim. The capture itself had been less ceremonious than the briefing suggested. A downed Corsair had been reported by a farmer and sealed off by local troops. Pilot statements were fragmentary. The official incident log read like this: "A storm came in from the sea. Radio failure. emergency landing reported near the dunes. Pilot said he misread a heading and had no identification. Soldiers arrived and discovered an intact airframe with external ammunition belts partially corroded and a gun sight that did not match German patterns. A short interview followed between Lieutenant Jorgensen and a shaken American pilot who claimed navigational failure. Dialogues at the scene were clipped and investigative. The farmer said, "It fell like a bird with a broken wing." The pilot kept repeating, "I could not find the carrier." A corporal asked, "Any signs of combat?" The pilot answered, "No hits, just water and wind and a sick compass." Jorgensen recorded, "Check serials and armament. This could be training or diversion." Krauss examined the wheels and noted salt on the airframe and a faint smell of seaweed in the cockpit, a tactile detail that told of an emergency from the channel. Transport and orders followed a strict hierarchy and a shorter, sharper set of exchanges. Feldwebel Lange issued a transportation plan, and the Corsair was moved by a chain of trucks and improvised dollies to the airfield. Weather briefings arrived as scratchy paper and whispered radios. Commands came from above. Hauptmann Weber said, "This is a state priority. Do not allow photographs outside controlled channels." Dr. Richter interjected, "We will need access to mount sensors. Can we cut a panel?" Weber replied, "You may, but notify logistics first." Lieutenant Jorgensen said, "Keep the pilot aside. He is a source. Do not let him leave." Oberleutnant Stahl, preparing to fly, answered, "I will need at least 2 competent men in the tower and a full suit of instruments." The weight of authority hung in the room. On the day of flight preparation, the Corsair revealed its oddities up close, and the checklist became a document of comparative anthropology. The engine was a Pratt & Whitney R2800 or similar, the cowling packed tightly and rumored to push higher supercharger stages for altitude performance. The propeller hub felt heavy under Krauss's fingers. The canopy rail slid with a gritty whisper, and the cockpit was deep and narrow, the stick offset to the right to clear the long nose. And 4 20mm cannons bulged under the wings in a configuration that suggested both punch and recoil. Stahl sat and felt the seat shape, the canvas rubbing against his flight suit, tasted the grease on the control yoke, heard the distant clank of wrenches, smelled the fuel that banished any remaining humidity from the hangar, and felt a pressure in his chest that came from knowing the clock would not stop. The preparations involved a sequence of exchanges more intimate and longer than those before. Obermeister Krauss said, "Engine spins free, oil pressure green at idle, no leaks." Stahl asked, "How are the throttle linkages?" Krauss answered, "Smooth but stiff." Dr. Richter said, "The aileron feel is heavier than our fighters. That may mean greater surface area or gearing differences." Stahl replied, "We will test ailerons at low speed and then again at high. Do you have extra balance lights?" Krauss answered, "Yes, in the truck." Gefreiter Müller asked, "What about the gun systems? Shall we arm?" Stahl said, "No live ammo. We only need the harmonization dummy loads." Lieutenant Jorgensen said, "Document everything. Nothing gets lost." Oberleutnant Stahl closed, "Start timers when I call throttle." In the air, the test sequence became a study of physics and sensation. The engine note rose from a rumble to a deep metallic roar. The propeller carved wind into a steady howl, and the plane peeled off the runway with a tug that was both forceful and composed. The first exchanges over the radio were technical and almost conversational as they calibrated the flight together. Stahl called, "Climb power set, trimming now." Ground called back, "Speed at 50 knots, rotate at 65." Stahl reported, "Clean and climbing, nose feels heavy, trimming nose up." Ground said, "Rate of climb target 3,000 feet per minute, report when stable." Stahl answered, "We are at 3,200, instrument checks good." Dr. Richter over the radio said, "Note roll coupling as speed increases." The main test segment required repeated maneuvers and an expanded set of exchanges, 8 in total, between Stahl and his ground team and an attached observer in a second ship. First, they measured acceleration on a straight run for a measured mile, a stopwatch in Mueller's hands. Then they pulled into a sustained rate of climb and recorded time to 5,000 feet. Then they tested the zoom maneuver engagement, pushing the Corsair into steep salients to measure energy retention, a tactic known as boom and zoom in Allied doctrine and observed here for its potential for interception. Each run delivered numbers that translated into doctrine. Maximum speed at low altitude registered at roughly 420 miles per hour over the measured course, a figure notably higher than the local BF-109's maximum of around 350 miles per hour in similar conditions. Rate of climb averaged 4,000 feet per minute in the mid-power settings and peaked near 5,000 in a zoom climb, numbers that suggested a marked energy advantage. The aileron response remained heavy but positive up to high speed, with the stabilizer maintaining trim under abrupt throttle changes. Control forces were measured in kilogram equivalents using a retrofit rig and compared to the FW-190's lighter but twitchier feel. The sensory account of each maneuver remained present. Wind slapped the canopy. The engine exhaled in a metallic staccato when the throttle was snapped back. The smell of hot primer and oil followed prolonged high power settings. The back of Stahl's neck stung with sweat despite the cold, and the seat harness creaked against chest in hard pullouts. The dialogue in the cockpit expanded over 8 exchanges of increasing tension. Stahl said, "I am pulling 3G, controls tight but responsive." The observer, Lieutenant Jorgensen, replied, "Readouts show energy retention high, keep the attitude." Stahl answered, "Deploying aileron now, roll rate acceptable." Dr. Richter on the radio added, "Watch for elevator nulls at high alpha." Stahl replied, "Noticed a slight delay, probably balance issue." Obermeister Krauss said, "Keep below red line, we cannot risk catastrophic failure." Stahl replied, "I will trade speed for energy now, starting zoom." Ground called, "Timing now, stabilize at 5,000, record G readings." Stahl answered, "G readings at 3.5 and holding. Rate of climb remains superior." 3 moments of tension punctuated the exercise, and each forced Stahl to weigh his duty against risk. The first came when a sudden oil pressure drop flickered the gauge during a high-power climb. For a minute, the cockpit smelled of burning, and the engine note altered. Internally, Stahl relived maintenance nights, the fingers that had tightened cowling bolts, the classroom drills that murmured emergency procedures in his mind. He throttled back, feathered, and then forced power up, and the gauge returned. The emergency was brief, but the decision to continue gnawed at the team and at command. The second moment occurred when a control surface began to buffet during a high-speed dive, a shudder that moved through the stick into his palms, intimating a harmonization or balance problem. His hands tightened. He felt the vibration under his gloves like a warning in bone, and he fought to keep the nose steady. He eased off the dive and returned to shallow turns to assess. The third tension arrived when command radioed a cancellation order. Berlin wanted the aircraft grounded and moved to a more secure facility. Stahl had to choose between obeying direct orders and completing the measure that meant so much to strategic learning. He could have folded and let analysis wait, but he opted to file an immediate preliminary report with exact figures and insisted on one final timed run. Each of those moments stretched for 500 or more characters in memory and consequence, a condensed rehearsal of duty. The technical revelations from those tests could not be dismissed. The Corsair's profile produced a sustained energy advantage in a climb and a top speed advantage in level flight that allowed it to dictate engagement range, to hit and then extend, to avoid the classic overshoot trap that plagued many interceptors when they tried to follow at close range. The report that Stahl wrote in careful script drew on measured numbers. Peak speed, 420 miles per hour at sea level versus 350 for the BF-109. Rate of climb, 4,000 plus feet per minute. Superior energy retention on zoom maneuvers. Control harmonization, heavy but maintainable. The tactical recommendation was blunt. Interception doctrine could not rely on close-in dogfight or pure turn fighting against such a platform. Instead, fighters would need to adopt energy denial tactics, employ heavier armament at distance, and revise escort patterns to protect vulnerable elements. The immediate chain of command reacted with a mix of curiosity and caution. Hauptmann Weber forwarded the report with a cover note. He recommended adoption of certain anti-boom and zoom tactics, suggested rearguard formations, and advised limited dissemination to avoid diplomatic or propaganda consequences. Berlin's staff read the numbers, and the response was predictably political. Some in high command worried that leaking a captured machine's performance could force enemy adaptations. Others argued that tactical integrity demanded knowledge be shared immediately to save lives at the front. A whisper of censorship followed. Lieutenant Jorgensen recorded that a senior official suggested sending the Corsair to a remote depot for further study and removing mention of its speed from open files. The irony was not lost on Stahl. He had delivered facts, but the path from data to doctrine ran through a maze of politics. The aftermath was multi-layered and extended in time. 1 month later, Stahl sat again in a briefing room, the air still reeking faintly of the Corsair's oil. He received a terse dispatch that his preliminary report had been circulated to regional command. Tactical pamphlets suggested provisional countermeasures, and a small detachment had been ordered to study armament ranges. People who had watched the initial tests felt vindicated, but also uneasy. 3 months later, a thin manual landed on the lieutenant's desk describing new interception windows and recommending revised altitude bands for patrol routes. The manual quoted select figures but avoided full disclosure. The Corsair had been moved under cover.